My name is Caitlin Burgess. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California and Washington State. I'm also a licensed attorney. So I am going to be doing a presentation on an intensive therapeutic intervention, which is part of the interventions that there has been a lot of controversy about and are known on social media and in the media sometimes as reunification camps. I am going to correct, or at least try to correct, some of the misinformation that is proliferating regarding these programs. And I am also going to be talking about how the program is structured, what each day of this program looks like. I am going to be talking about some of the research regarding these programs and their effectiveness. I'm also going to be bringing up some of the controversies, as I had mentioned, as well as some of the other programs that are out there. And hopefully I can clear up some misconceptions about these types of programs. So the Turning Points for Families treatment protocol for dysfunctional family relationships really involve several types of relationships that are dysfunctional relationships that are commonly found in these types of proceedings. So one of them would be severed or impaired parent-child relationships. Another would be pathologically enmeshed or pathologically bonded parent-child relationships, non-functional co-parenting relationships, and also in cases where the courts have made a finding of parental alienation. So I want to make it really clear here that when I do this program and when my colleagues do this program, we do not take on a case unless the court has already determined that the children are alienated or the children are unreasonably or unjustifiably rejecting an otherwise fit parent. So typically this case will come to my office after many years of protracted custody litigation, after multiple failed attempts of in-office traditional family therapy with a therapist who specializes in resist and refuse dynamics in children, multiple experts testifying, and custody evaluations, one or more. I mean, these are cases that have been going on for years. And we will not take this case unless a court, after hearing all the testimony, after hearing all the evidence, has determined that the parent who is being rejected, the parent who the children are resisting contact with, is a fit and safe parent, and that there is no abuse. Otherwise, we won't take the case. So, and we're not, I am generally not involved with the family until there is an actual order that this program be implemented. I have typically never even met the children or the family, and I don't take any part in making the finding that there is no abuse. I just receive the orders and then start doing my work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my colleagues that also do the Turning Points for Families therapeutic intervention. So this intervention was conceived by Ms. Linda Gottlieb, who's a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed marriage and family therapist in New York. So Linda was trained under Dr. Salvador Minuchin, who was really the founder of structural family therapy, and he was a child psychiatrist. So Linda developed this program. Her first intervention was in 2015, and traditionally she would have everyone fly out, from California or Washington or Texas or wherever and come to her program because she's only licensed in New York. Then she trained my colleague, Loretta Mace, who's a licensed professional counselor supervisor in Texas. So Loretta did her first program in 2019. And then in about 2020, I met Linda through a colleague, my dear friend who has unfortunately passed, Dr. Stephen Miller, who was really a pioneer in some of this work. He introduced me to Linda, and from there, Linda trained me on how to do this program. So I've been doing this program since about 2020. I actually started doing the program during the pandemic. My first program was done remotely, and that was a success. Everyone involved determined it to be a success. And now I've started to do the program at the parent's residence. So unlike Linda, who does it at her office, when I do this program in California, I will actually do the program at the residence of the parent, so the rejected parent. So that is definitely not camp. So to begin, that's just a little background of the program and who's doing the program in America right now. So this program does require a minimum 90-day protective separation and no contact period between the previously favored parent and the child or the children. And I will really get into the details of why that protective separation is necessary for this program later in my presentation. So before I get into the nuts and bolts of each day of this 4-day program, I wanted to provide 2 caveats. So caveat 1 is this is a generic protocol for the treatment of the common family dynamics occurring in cases where a child or children are unreasonably and unjustifiably rejecting a fit parent. So that is how this protocol is implemented, right? It's implemented for these specific types of families, but I want to recognize that each family is unique. So as the clinical picture is refined and updated as the program progresses, I may make modifications or additions to the program as it goes on. So as I obtain information from the family members and as I observe the family members communicating, I may make these modifications to the protocol, but those modifications are always made with the best interest of the child standard as a focal point. And caveat 2 is please note that the requirements of clinical practice, so I'm an LMFT, so the standards of my clinical practice require that I make my own assessment and evaluation of the clinical conditions. So that would mean the family dynamics and any psychiatric conditions that are present when the family presents at turning points. And the requirement here is that I make an ongoing assessment throughout the entire intervention. So should I determine that the family dynamics are contrary to what had informed the court's orders for this intervention, I have a duty to stop the intervention immediately. And that would mean that I would have to inform the court. I would have to, of course, notify the parties. If there are attorneys for the parties, I would notify the attorneys and any other professionals that are involved, assuming that I have, releases to do so. But I would indeed need to stop the program immediately. And so this has never occurred before any time that I have done this program, and I'm not aware of it ever occurring with my colleagues. But let me give an example of why I might need to stop the program. So let's say that the court has ordered turning points and custody is to be transitioned from the favored parent to the rejected parent at the courthouse. And, that all works out and I arrive at the parent's residence that afternoon. Let's say the custody has changed in the morning and now it's 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If I find out at any point or at that point that the family dynamics are not what they had seemed, like let's say I find out that the parent who now has custody of the children is abusive or has a substance abuse issue, or there's some other danger or risk to the child, my duty is not to cause harm, and my duty is to keep children safe. So I would immediately stop the intervention and inform the court. And as I mentioned, that's never happened before. So with those 2 caveats in mind, I'd like to get into more of the substance of this intervention. So a 2021 research study confirmed that Turning Points for Families is a safe and highly effective intervention for the healing of relationships between a child or children and their alienated parents. So this study was conducted by Dr. Jennifer Harmon, who is a professor or associate professor of psychology at Colorado State University, and she is in the Applied Social and Health Psychology program. So Dr. Harmon undertook this study with Luke Sodders and Jamara Afifi. And what they were trying to determine was whether Turning Points for Families was safe, did not cause harm, and led to positive changes between the child or children and their alienated parent. So this was a study that was specifically conducted where the courts had already determined there to be a finding of alienation. Now, the study was published in a peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Family Therapy, in 2021. And what Dr. Harmon and her colleagues did is that they reviewed all the court orders, and for, I think it was about 30 families that my colleague, Ms. Gottlieb, provided this intervention for. So she reviewed all those court orders, and then she reviewed video recordings of the actual intervention with these children and their parent. And over the course of the intervention, Dr. Harmon wanted to determine if relational communications between the parent and the children improved. Social supports, she wanted to note if any social supports for the children were increased. And she also wanted to evaluate if the communal coping improved with this family. And so that refers to a family jointly owning a problem and proactively taking responsibility for that problem together. So what Dr. Harmon found, and this is really articulated in her study, improvements in the parent-child were noted, and she also found that the intervention helped to improve family members' communal coping scores. So participation did not lead to any negative changes on any measure. So this preliminary study indicates that Turning Points for Families, like other structural family therapy interventions that are intensive this way, is a safe and effective treatment for severely alienated children. So Turning Points for Families is a symbolic, experiential intervention that merges family therapy or family systems therapy with psychoeducation. The intervention is compelling because it involves human learning growth in all three realms: cognitive, affective, and behavioral. And suspension of contact with the favored parent or the pathologically enmeshed parent or the alienating parent, whatever the case may be, is necessary because it frees the child to engage with and invest in their previously rejected parent. And it also allows the child to be free from the abusive and controlling loyalty conflict. So previously the child is in the middle of the loyalty conflict and feels that they need to align with the favored parent. And what is really critical here is when the exchanges occur at the courthouse, which is where we are now requiring that the exchanges occur for a variety of reasons that I'll get into later. So when the favored parent brings the children to the courthouse, and mind you, in these cases, sometimes these children have not seen their rejected parent for years. So when the favored parent brings the children to the courthouse or the child to the courthouse, the court and then leaves, the court will inform the children that these are the orders and that custody is now changed to their rejected parent, and the court explains why. And so when the children no longer have to take responsibility for the choice to see or not to see their father, to see or not to see their mother, that frees the child from that loyalty conflict, and they're able to invest emotionally in their previously rejected parent. So the program philosophy. So the Turning Points for Families therapeutic protocol is based on the principles of structural family therapy that were formulated by child psychiatrist Dr. Salvador Minuchin. And its philosophical underpinnings are compelling, thoughtful, and sound. And so based on these philosophical underpinnings, what is implemented here and what is the kind of overarching theme and what motivates the program is the theory that people are most likely to change for people whom they love and for those who love them. So really, based on this principle, when I'm working with these families, we elevate the formerly rejected parent or the formerly alienated parent to that of the healer of the child. So I'm just a facilitator. The rejected parent essentially becomes a co-therapist with me in healing the parent-child relationship. So to facilitate the healing, the child and the parent are assisted and supporting in their re-experiencing of each other through memorabilia and mementos of their prior relationship before the onset of the rejection. So invariably in these cases, these children will have had previously, prior to all the hostilities setting in and prior to the divorce, a warm and loving relationship with their now rejected parent. So a critical piece of this intervention is the memorabilia and the mementos that document that positive, happy relationship. So before the intervention even takes place, I'll meet with the favored parent or, the alienating parent if there's been a finding of parental alienation. And I'll also meet with the rejected parent and I'll explain to them, look, I need you to collect mementos of the happy relationship. And mind you, I include, and I make very clear that I want you to include the both parents. So I want photographs of mom and dad, or mom and mom if it's a same-sex relationship, or dad and dad, but where things were happy. And so they'll put together the photos, they'll put together video recordings, they can put, have letters or crafts or anything else that is reminiscent of that happy relationship. And I assist the rejected parent and the child to travel down memory lane and to engage emotionally by reliving their meaningful relationships prior to the onset of the rejection. And so this is a really critical piece of this intervention because it allows the child or the children to reconnect with his or her genuine loving feelings and actual need for the rejected parent. So these children have not extinguished these feelings of love. These feelings have just been repressed in the care of the other parent. So going down this memory lane helps these children re-engage with those positive feelings and reconnect with the parent that they had previously rejected. So another critical piece here is the correcting of misinformation. So often this misinformation is malicious. The children, either intentionally or unintentionally, have often been exposed to toxic allegations pertaining to their rejected parent. And by correcting this misinformation, we're not putting the children in the middle of the conflict. The children were previously in the middle of the conflict because the favored or alienating parent had been exposing them either consciously or unconsciously to this misinformation and toxic allegation. So what we're actually doing is by correcting the misinformation, we are removing the children from the middle of the conflict. So the Turning Points for Families treatment protocol actualizes the healing experience between the child and the parent during afternoon activities. So I'm only involved for 4 hours a day directly with the family, the rejected parent and the children, for 4 days. So I'd like to do the intervention in the morning at the parent's residence, and part of the intervention, sometimes during lunch, we will talk about activities that the child and the parent and their extended family or nuclear family, if they're involved, will engage in that afternoon. So we'll come up with activities together. If it's around the holidays, kids can go to pumpkin patches if they celebrate Halloween, or if it's, they can go to parks, they can go hike, they can get ice cream, they can go out to dinner, but we all collaborate together about the types of interventions and activities they'll be engaging in. So when the parent and the child or the children engage in these activities, it's actually a really critical piece of the intervention, because it allows that parent, sometimes for the first time in years, to actually take on a supervisory parental role with the child or children. And in addition to that, it allows them to enjoy the children and to engage with the children in a healthy activity. And as I had mentioned, the intervention is for the rejected parent or the alienated parent and the child or children. But that parent is welcome to include extended family members or additional members of their nuclear family. So step parents, adult children, half siblings, grandma and grandpa, aunts and uncles. And if they're going to include other family members in the intervention, I need to approve that with the parent prior to the intervention. So why are interventions such as this important for children? When I heard Ms. Griffin Donnell talk about Senate Bill 331, it does put some fear in my heart, because I feel like these types of services, whether they're intensive or whether they're in office, are really essential for children. It's so important for children to have positive and healthy relationships and frequent and continuing contact with both parents post-separation. So I'm really oppose any type of legislation that would take away such needed services for children. But in terms of these intensive interventions, this is something, as I mentioned previously, that the court just doesn't order immediately. This intervention is ordered typically after a trial and after multiple failed attempts at traditional in-office family therapy. So why would an intensive program such as this be critical and be ordered by a court? Well, it is necessary to remediate a particular form of child psychological abuse. I don't think there is any professional involved in the family court out there who believes that a parent who is negatively influencing a child to reject another parent, that would be a healthy behavior. If there has been a finding of parental alienation or parental alienating behaviors, that is child psychological abuse. And the outcomes for children who have an emotional cutoff with another parent and who are rejecting a parent are really poor developmentally. And so, and pathological enmeshment as well is can be considered a severe psychiatric condition for a child. And I'll get into that in more details later, but that can also be considered to be a very unhealthy dynamic between a child and their favorite parent. So this intervention is necessary to remediate child psychological abuse. So first, emotional cutoffs are unhealthy, right? When we engage in conflict with other people, or when there's conflict with someone, particularly a member of our family, it's not healthy to just cut off that person, right? It's important, especially when that person is a fit parent. It's important that we, are able to resolve conflict and that children learn how to resolve conflict. So this intervention helps children appropriately resolve conflict, which is going to be critical for kids as they develop and become adults. They are going to need to resolve conflict with their significant others, with their friends, in the workplace, with their family members. And so this intervention helps children learn how to do that effectively. Having healthy relationships with both parents is important for the development of positive self-esteem. And the other thing that's critical is that misperceptions and misconceptions about the rejected parent, the favored parent, and the family history can often be so extreme in these cases and so bizarre that they represent an actual break with reality. So the child has these misperceptions about their family and about the rejected parent, and they're not grounded in reality. And that is certainly not healthy for the child. While I cannot get into case-specific information for obvious reasons, I can give some examples of hypothetically bizarre narratives these children have about the rejected parent. For example, children will be in my office and they'll say on the first day I will be with the children at the residence, and they'll say to me, "My mother was so awful. She put me in a dog kennel overnight and I had to stay there." Or, my dad kept me in the attic and wouldn't feed me. Or, just stuff that the court has found not to be credible, and just really bizarre and extreme allegations in these cases. So it's important to correct misperceptions in these children. Also, the emotional hole that is left in a child by rejecting a parent is often filled with a great deal of negativity. And finally, if there has been a finding of alienation in these cases, these children are exceptionally vulnerable to punishing guilt. So if they have rejected a formerly loved parent, or maltreated a formerly loved parent, or even physically abused sometimes a formerly rejected parent, that exposes a child to punishing guilt. So it makes them very vulnerable to that. So this program helps absolve children of their guilt. So the Turning Points for Families treatment protocol requires a minimum 90-day no contact period between the favored parent, or the pathologically enmeshed parent, or the alienating parent, and the child or children. And this is considered a protective separation, and it really is critical for this successful intervention. And what I tell children on the first day of the intervention is, this is just a timeout from your mom, or a timeout for your dad, and make up time for your other parent. And the kids seem to understand it when you use that type of language. It becomes understandable. We're not trying to replace dad with mom, or mom with dad, or mom with mom, or dad with dad if they're same-sex same-sex parenting relationships post-divorce. What we're trying to do is just take a time out with the previously favored parent so they can reintegrate and reconnect with their previously rejected parent. And then we want to reintegrate that favored parent so the child is able to relate to both parents and doesn't feel like they can only love mom if they reject dad, or only love dad while they reject mom. And so integrating both parents, or the favored parent, into this intervention after the 90 days is essential in this program. So I just wanted to touch on that really quickly, because I'm not trying in this program to remove one parent and replace it with the other. I'm trying to reintegrate the favored parent after the minimum 90 days. So I also want to mention that the no contact period, if there's been a finding of alienation, it would also include third-party co-alienators. So if grandparents have been alienating the children against one parent, or spouses of the favored parent, they can't have any contact either. And the contact we're talking about is not just direct contact, but it's also indirect contact, and it's all forms of contact. So no phone calls, no social media, no Snapchat, no Instagram, no Facebook, no email, no text. And that's really important, as I have stated. I do want to make clear, though, if prior to the 90 days, the favored or alienating parent obtains needed services and is credibly able to document and demonstrate that he or she is ready, willing, and able not only to support the child or children's relationship with the previously rejected parent, but also to require that relationship. We would request that the no contact order be lifted as soon as possible. So in the court order for this program, if I'm working with the attorneys or the parties before there's a court order, I say, look, make sure that you have a hearing date set before the 90 days expires so that we can, the court can hear testimony and receive evidence to justify extending the no contact period from longer than 90 days, lifting the no contact period, or reducing the no contact period. So now I would like to talk a little bit about pathological enmeshment or pathological bonding between a child or children and their favored parent. So Miss Griffin-Donnell spoke to pathological enmeshment in her presentation, and pathological enmeshment is one of the things we try to heal in Turning Points for families. So pathological enmeshment is the rigid, dysfunctional over-alignment or bonding between a child and the favored parent. It involves an extreme boundary violation of the child by the parent that literally engulfs the child across all domains: cognitive, psychological, behavioral, and interpersonal. So it is an enmeshment dynamic that literally robs the child of the child's own thoughts, beliefs, wishes, and opinions, especially in relation to the rejected parent, and instead implants in the child that parent's thoughts, beliefs, wishes, and opinions. It creates pathological splitting in children. So that would mean that these children start to perceive the world and their parents in black and white extremes. And it also creates a pathological dependency in children upon their favored parent. And so when I'm talking about black and white extremes, these children engage in psychological splitting. This is why this intervention is ordered. These children are seeing the world in black and white terms in relation to their parents. For example, my mom's the best. My mom is perfect. I'm so happy with my mother. Everything my mother does is right and great and wonderful. She's the perfect mom. Dad, never speak to him again. He's awful. He's an abuser. He's, malicious. He's manipulative. So there is no middle ground. These children are really psychologically splitting. And this is considered to be a severe psychiatric condition for the child. So there are three types of pathological enmeshment that we work with in Turning Points. The first would be adultification. So adultification occurs when the favored parent shares inappropriate adult and parental issues with the child. So you would hear kids talking about details of the favored parent's legal arguments pertaining to custody. They'll understand financial matters. My dad's not paying child support. My mom's abusive. So they'll have been exposed to all these adult issues. And some of it can be real and some of it can be fabricated, but the child literally becomes an aligned surrogate of the pathologically enmeshed parent. So there's also parentification. So parentification occurs when the favored parent manipulates the child to feel sorry for him or her by expressing that he or she has been victimized by the other parent, and it manipulates the child to meet the parent's psychological and interpersonal needs. So that is not healthy either, and it is also a very serious violation of the parental hierarchy because the child becomes even more powerful than the favored parent because again, the child's providing the favored parent all this emotional support. And finally, there's infantilization. So that's a form of pathological enmeshment when the parent treats the child as if they're much younger and fails to recognize and encourage the child's age-appropriate functioning. And that thereby conveys the message to the child that they are not able to determine their own path. And it creates a dependency, a psychological dependency. And it's hard for the child or children to separate or individuate age appropriately in a timely manner. All right, so now I'm going to get into each particular day of the program. So day one, when I'm doing it here in California, custody is exchanged at the courthouse. The kids are brought back to the parents' house, and then I arrive. And prior to my arrival, I have worked with the favored parent, and he or she has written a letter to the children. It's called a support letter, and this letter is very important. It must state that the favored parent supports the reunification and why. It must state the positive qualities the rejected parent has. It must state why it's important for the child to have a meaningful relationship with the rejected parent. So in an ideal world, that support letter has been prepared and approved by me prior to my meeting the children, so I can read that letter to the children at the beginning of the intervention. But in reality, that letter is typically not prepared by the favored parent, and I usually have to work with the favored parent over a month or two, and even after the intensive intervention is over. Regardless, we all meet at the residence and we introduce ourselves because, as I said, typically the children have not met me before. And we all explore and talk about what their understanding is of the court's orders. And we also provide any clarification at that time regarding the program's purpose. And so I might even read a section of the order into the intervention if that helps clarify the order. So then we go down memory lane, and that typically takes about an hour and a half or 2 hours. And it's really wonderful to watch the child become hypnotized by the stroll down memory lane via the memorabilia. And this typically sparks a lot of really animated and engaged conversation between the formerly rejected parent, because they're becoming less and less rejected at this point, and the child or the children. And you can see right before your eyes the child's resistance to that parent start diminishing. So at this point, I am elevating the previously rejected parent into the role of co-therapist. And that parent is assuming the role of the healer of the child. Positive, effective reactions are evident at this point by all. And, excuse me, and the child's resistance to, pardon me, and defiance of the alienated parent has always been markedly diminished. And you can see the child starting to accept the parent's parental authority. Then we all have lunch together, and that tends to be really lovely, and we can talk about the memorabilia some more. And during lunch, we talk about the planned activity for the parent and their extended or nuclear family if they're participating in the children. And then I'll leave, and then the parent will go on the activity with the child or children, and they take on the parental role over the child during the activity as nurturer, advocate, supporter, and supervisor. So on the close of day one, I'll typically get a call from that parent, or if I don't get a call, I'll call them and I'll say how it was going, and I'll provide reassurance to the parent. And I'm also sure to counsel the parent not to discuss anything controversial, to remain positive. And I also let that parent know that I am on call 24 hours. If I am doing this intervention, I have my phone with me literally all night. I say, if you need to call me at 3 in the morning, you can call me at 3 in the morning. I've never had that happen. No one has ever called me at 3 in the morning or at all for any type of emergency. Then we do day two. So I arrive again at the residence, and feedback is elicited about the prior day's events and also about the activities, and they tend to want to share a lot of pictures with me, and they're very excited about it, and I hear all about their adventure. And then we play a series of psychoeducational videos. So there's a particular video that I play called Welcome Back Pluto, And it's basically a dramatization of the dynamics of parental alienation. So recognizing that this intervention is not exclusive to parental alienation, it will still be relevant even if there hasn't been a finding of parental alienation. The family will find relevant pieces of that video. So this is the psychoeducational piece. We'll discuss, when the video is over, the applicability of the video to this family, and then the previously rejected parent will sensitively correct the child's revisionist history without pathologizing the favorite parent. So the child generally isn't as astute as the parent in being able to recognize the dynamics, but you can see through the child's behavior and the positive changes and the restructuring of beliefs, myths, and feelings that the child is being positively impacted. Then we have lunch again. We talk about another activity. And you can see at this point that the child and the children, if there are multiple kids, are like, there's always been, in my observations, substantial reconnection at this point. And they are really beginning to resume their roles prior to the onset of the rejection. So they'll have their afternoon activity, and I'll call the parent again in the evening and say, how is it going? I'll provide assurances, and I will update the parent on the child's adjustment. And then day three. Day three is feedback is elicited about the afternoon activity, and day two, clarification of the family history continues. Then we're then going to play short videos about memory. So these are really fun videos, how the brain stores memory, the frailty of the human memory, and the ease of implanting false memories. Because remember, these cases this intervention is ordered when the court has already made a finding that the fit parent is non-abusive, and that the rejected parent is a fit parent and non-abusive. And so the child needs to understand in a sensitive way through these videos and through the treatment that they have had misperceptions about that parent. And because they acknowledge these misperceptions, they're absolved of having maltreated their disfavored parent and assuaged of the guilt they have previously had for maltreating that parent. So then we have lunch again, and we talk about the next afternoon activity. And then I leave and call the parent again in the evening. How's it going? Get more positive feedback. And at this point, you know, they're really making a lot of progress. You're seeing that the reconnection is very positive. And then we're at day 4. I again arrive at the residence. I again get feedback regarding the activities and how the therapeutic intervention has gone. And then we start talking, because the intensive intervention is almost over and we're on our last day, we'll start talking about pragmatic matters. How is life going to be after the intervention is over? You know, when they're going to see their other parent again. I provide the aftercare therapy typically because I'm local. I'm doing the intervention in California and I'm licensed here. So that provides a lot of continuity. So typically I'll start letting the kids know, or the child know, hey, I'm going to be seeing you once a week at my office now, or once a week via Zoom. And then that tends to titrate down to alternating weeks after about 3 months. Because the children, in my experience, really do benefit from this program. And as I have mentioned, I wouldn't be doing this program if it wasn't working or if it was causing children harm. So that's how we'll end the program. And I summarize the course of the therapy and I entertain any questions. And then they have another afternoon activity. So before I get into the court orders that are required for these types of programs, I want to make really clear that in order for the program to be successful, I like it when there's a minors counsel involved, who represents, who can advocate for the child. And I also typically require that I'm able to collaborate and communicate with all the attorneys. And, The intervention works best if this is a collaborative process and both parents support the intervention, right? So, and both attorneys support the intervention, because if it becomes adversarial with the previously favored parent, that just can be really toxic and impede the intervention. So it needs to be a collaboration and everyone needs to be on board. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the court orders. The court orders need to be very specific. There need to be at least a temporary transfer of custody to the rejected or alienated parent to have temporary sole physical and legal custody of the children for a minimum of 90 days. So that's with the favored parent. And as I mentioned before the 90 days is expired, it's helpful to have the court order say there will be a hearing so we can talk about whether we extend the no contact period or minimize it. I have to say, on the interventions that I'm doing, I really like to bring the favored parent on board as soon as possible and at the 90-day period, because I think it is so healthy for these children who've reconnected with their previously rejected parent to start, beginning family therapy with their favored parent. And I really like to integrate that. I don't want to just replace one parent with the other. We also are talking about, in that court order, the need for the transition of the children from the favored parent to the rejected parent to actually occur at the courthouse. There have been problems with these interventions with the transitions. And so when the transition occurs at the courthouse, and I don't want to be present there, court sometimes would want me to be present and actually start the intervention there and help with the exchange. I no longer want to do that. There are a variety of reasons for that, but mainly I would like the order to include transition of the care from one parent to the other to occur at the courthouse. I'm also going to say that we would like, in Turning Points for Families, for there to be orders that the parents and the children cannot talk about this program on social media. There have been some instances where children have talked about the program on social media, and it puts them at risk, and it also has put the clinician at risk. So that would be important to be a part of orders going forward. And personally, unless I get such an order like that, I'm not sure I can take the intervention, because it's a protective type of order, not just for the children, but also for the clinician. So basically, the other thing that's critical is the support letter that the favored parent needs to write. And I spoke about that earlier. Typically, even though the favored parent knows they're supposed to write a letter and what needs to be included in the letter, typically I don't read that letter during the 4-day intensive because it's not ready yet. I have to really work with that parent and their therapist to have an appropriate letter. There also should be an order that the favored parent engage in their own therapeutic services, and I need to approve of who that therapist will be, and we need to work collaboratively together. And I want to say that my colleagues and I at Turning Points are coming up with a simultaneous intervention that the favored parent can be doing while we're doing the intensive family therapy. And we'd like to really start integrating that favored parent more and more into the treatment protocols. The favored parent can also write an apology letter. I think that is an important piece too, and that would facilitate the healing of the family members. And it's important for children to see parents owning their own mistakes. I also require that the rejected parent apologize to the children for any parenting shortcomings or anything that's happened. So that is the gist of the program. It is not a camp. It's very important for me in my work to make sure that children are benefiting from my services and they're not being harmed from my services. So if I didn't endorse this program and I didn't feel like it was really benefiting these kids, I simply wouldn't do it. This is a very small portion of my practice. Although I do a lot of family therapy where there's a resist, refuse dynamic in children in office, Turning Points for Families is a smaller part of my practice. Mostly, I think it's because it's such a new intervention here in California. So now I'm going to touch briefly on some other intensive interventions. Dr. Lynn Steinberg in LA, she's a PhD, and she does a 4-day intensive intervention that requires a minimum 90-day no contact order with the favored parent. There's also transitioning families. That's a very different intervention from what we do here at Turning Points. It is a series of educational sessions, discussions, groups, and experiential exercises, some of which utilize horses in an equine assisted growth and learning model. It's not just for high conflict divorce. It's also for reunification, post-abduction, or major trauma, or blended families wanting to enhance their transition. I need to be really clear that transitioning families is more of a cooperative model. It doesn't require a minimum 90-day no contact. It's case specific, and it's based on intervention guidelines for responding to child abduction developed by the Department of Justice. Finally, I want to touch on briefly some of the more of the misinformation surrounding the program, Turning Points for Families and Other Intensive. One Mom's Battle on Facebook has, last I checked, which was just a few weeks ago, or a few days ago rather, 84,960 followers. Alienation Industry has 878 followers on Facebook. Some of the statements that have been made on these sites, I'll read two of them. You can follow along with my PowerPoint slide. It is designer human trafficking. When we have people profiting from the trauma they are causing children, it is a crisis. Again, I take my work very seriously. Professional ethics are very important to me. If I were feeling at any time that I was causing harm to children, I would not be doing this. To the contrary, I feel that this work is actually really benefiting children. Otherwise, I simply wouldn't do the work. Another quote from One Mom's Battle Facebook page. This was April 1st, 2023. I've heard it's a compound with high fences and barbed wire. Why is that? This is the reality of hashtag reunification camp, hashtag alienation industry. This is the United States of America. So there's no barbed wire. It's not a compound. I'm doing this intervention in the comfort of the parent's home. And when my colleagues are doing it, they're doing it in their therapy offices, or also as applicable in the residence of the parent who was rejected. So I really want to talk about where this touch briefly on what types of courts or where this has been ordered. It's been ordered all across the United States and Canada. Again, I think I was asked to do this presentation here because it's an intervention that hasn't been ordered often in California, simply because I wasn't offering the intervention until about 2 years ago. So it's 85 different courts: New York, North Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, Delaware, South Carolina, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Washington, Colorado, Arizona, Quebec, Canada, New Mexico, Michigan, on and on. So I really want to thank you for listening. If you have any questions at all and would like to contact me offline when this presentation is over, please do. It's been a pleasure to present here. Thanks.